a big thing that happened while I was in Blacksburg was Elise and I got married. And so that was a big deal. And we went to, she commuted from Blacksburg to Durham, and that was a huge sacrifice on her part, 2 years. But she lived up there half the week and would come back. And she lived with an older couple that was, great. And so yeah, we went from Blacksburg, and when she finished seminary, moved to Florence. That was a wonderful time in so many respects. We had our first child in Florence, and we owned a home for those 3 years, and it was really lovely. The commute for me to Manning was a challenge, and I think being assigned to a place like Manning and not being residential was really kind of it presented a huge obstacle up front, and so there were lots of days that I would leave early and get back late, and Sundays that was most particularly true. So by the time we perceived, I don't want to skip completely over Manning, but there were it was a time of growth and learning, and also frustration and ministry-wise. But then you're having your first little girl, and those things kind of that's what sticks with you, right?
I remember y'all walked our house sometimes. We'd walk yours.
Yeah.
It was a nice time for friends.
Yeah, there were so many good things about it that those things remain. But in terms of ministry, and even within the ministry, during that time we took a group to Peru, and had gone down with you to
Lake Titicaca.
Yeah, that's right. And so there were some extraordinarily good things about that period of time, and I learned a lot, and I was blessed to have people on the staff parish who pointed out some things I could improve that were legitimate and good. That was that's rare in a church setting, and I remember Don Ellis pointing out a thing or two that were totally legitimate and reasonable, and called my attention to the way I was allocating time, and so that's a special place in ministry where people will be honest and tell you something you actually need to hear versus saying you're doing a great job.
And we were talking about how you, especially in Charleston, seem to be very much more deliberate about things. I wonder if the Manning conversations helped you get to that place.
Absolutely, the Manning conversations helped getting more organized. I think the Reynolds process helped enormously, and one of the things that was just I talked this morning about how my daughter learns, and one of the things that my executive coach in the process of that pointed out to me, she said, when you're the type that you are and all the things that she was taking into account, colors can tend to stick with you more easily than the words. And so I had, to that point, been the faithful Methodist who had a Cokesbury planner in my pocket.
I remember that. You used that very
but it drove everyone nuts, because I would scribble things and either not tell Elise or forget, and so it marked intentional transition on my part to Google Calendar, which color codes your calendars. And so I can visualize a week and the block of time and the blocks of well, that's green, that's family, that's red, that's me, that's purple, that's Elise. And so it totally, and we totally laugh about this in terms of personal growth. Early on, Elise was, she was big into calendaring and what's going to happen in 6 months, and it would nearly, after several minutes of it, it would nearly send me into hyperventilation. I would just feel trapped and feel like, oh crap, this is just awful. I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. I take it as it comes, and so her assistance with that and insistence on that really made a difference in terms of I became the person who was leading the calendaring process, and I it took what was a significant liability and transformed it into something I could, with the right tools, I could do pretty darn well. And so establishing those systems that worked for me, and then also allowed staff people to see blocked on the calendar where I was and when and why, and it really helped in all kinds of respects. And in Charleston gave the secretary access to that, so she could put an appointment on the calendar and it would appear on my phone, and it was very good that way. So
what was ministry like in West Ashley?
West Ashley was really, really exciting at first. I mean, it was my first one church, one pastor appointment, and it was, we were within walking distance. They had just completed, when we were moving in, a bike path that led from our neighborhood to the church and beyond. And so, we saw ways of creating community within that, and tried to work in that. And I was reflecting with Joe. It was this very, very strange time of great potential and excitement, and we now granted this didn't end up being a number that stuck, which is I had diagnosed far and wide what the problems were with other growth models and stuff, but we brought in, I think, in the first 2 years, 150 new people into membership, and we're just constantly having new member classes, and I think we call them partners in ministry or something. It was trying to make people take it more seriously, and yet in the midst of that, there were also parallel processes going on that, in retrospect, I know that neither the church nor I were equipped for, and so there wasn't kind of infrastructure at that time to hold all that, and we weren't able to build a team of leadership because of a number of distractions, both personal and within the church. So I mean, all of that kind of quickly fizzled when the plans for growth took an unpredictable turn, and I've rehearsed those actually this morning already with Joe. But yeah,
you rehearsal, but you did a lot of work of trying to figure out what could be possible there in terms of physical plant and program growth.
Yeah, and again, assuming this never becomes ultimately public, the 2 years prior to my appointment there, they had begun a capital campaign, and the capital campaign was for a building that on the books was $2.1 million. And when I got there, they had about just at $250,000 after 2 years raised towards that. And it was the elephant in the room that nobody was talking about. And so it's an unenviable place to be the person who whispers that the emperor isn't wearing clothes. What are we going to do about this to reconcile this? Has anything been said to the congregation to bring those two visions into And I'm sure things had been done, but within the corporate memory, they had not been solidified and clarified. And so, it became a very, very quick process of assembling a capital campaign study group to say, here's our situation. How are we going to interpret this to the congregation, and how are we going to recalibrate expectations, because the amount we've raised and the amount that is going to be needed for this building aren't going to meet.
That requires some significant leadership.
Well, it required, absolutely. There were enormous, I put a good enormous effort into it. There were kind of things we did very well and things that I learned from. So the process, though, got derailed because of just an unimaginable scenario, and that ended up being the kind of tone setter, because that scenario began unfolding in September of my time in the first year, and so the next 2 years were consumed by trying to figure out A, what to do to reconcile those things, and B, when it looked like it was going to be resolved by someone stepping forward to make that contribution. Okay, well, if that's the case, then are the plans in the books the ones we want to follow through with? Is that the best stewardship of the resources? And so there were extensive and gee whiz, into the night and in the early morning conversations about that, and in the parking lot. So in the end, it turned from what should have been spiritually grounded to getting grounded and becoming a spiritual slog process of as much truth telling as we could do, and as much reconciliation as we could sow. And that was again, in sum, a very, very good process of learning about our character as things like that challenge us to do. But it did not have the kind of resolution. But by the end of my 5 years there, we had come to the place where there was a level of readiness to do something versus doing the thing that had been the glorious dream. And the renovations they've done there as I departed and since are beautiful. They've made a big difference, practically speaking, in terms of the functionality of their space, and it used the resources that they had, and all the hoops you got to jump through to submit and get approval from the charge conference and so forth, and from the district. And in that time, some leadership was developed that had not been active, and I learned a whole heap from a guy who remains a dear friend, who's an engineering professor at the Citadel. He had been the SPRC chair, and I mentioned learning from the Manning SPRC. Well, this guy taught me as an engineer, the process he was going to go through, and this is what the Book of Discipline says that SPRC is going to do. And so the first words are support, encourage, and equip staff people, and keep staff people accountable, and that sometimes gets reversed. So the effort to be intentional about staff development and make that a priority was an enormous stride forward, and frankly, to in the midst of all that I've described, there were staff issues that had to be resolved, and things that had lingered for too long. And when that is the case, you're the bad guy sometimes. So
from St. Andrews, your next appointment was Spartanburg. How do you characterize those years?
Ooh, you know, you missed that summary, I guess, this morning too, in terms of the years. So in 2007, the debacle began in Charleston, and 2008, our second child was born, and we're in a very small parsonage. I mean, very nice, but very small. And then in 2009, Elise's dad was diagnosed with amyloidosis. Sometimes I'm at a loss for words right now, but Pop received a diagnosis that proved to be the terminal one, and so that began in 2009, and Elise got pregnant that year and was pregnant as she helped her dad in his convalescence, and then went into premature labor for the first time among the three children. And so that was 2009 into 2010, and 2010 in terms of personal stuff, when she was 32 weeks pregnant and on bed rest with two kids 4 and under, her dad died, and so she had to handle that grief remotely because she was unable to attend the funeral, and I came up to do the funeral. And so a great deal of personal stuff in the midst of all the rest of it. And our son was born premature and was in the hospital, and relied on family to take care of the other children. And so just instability. Then within 6 months he had meningitis and was hospitalized again, and it was a pretty scary time. And you know, all that seemed to be panning out and calming down, and we were looking at a resumption of whatever normalcy is, and it was not long after that, in early 2012, that I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And so just from 2007 on, it has been there's been a constancy about crises for us. So like in 2011, towards the end of the year, I seemed to be getting a bunch of sinus infections that I wasn't able to lick, and I went to a doc in the box, and they did the blood work and you know, put me on another antibiotic, and this was maybe the third or fourth time I'd had sinus infections sequentially, and she commented that you know, your hemoglobin's a little low, you may want to check with your general practitioner about that. And so I didn't think much about it, and a month or two went by, and I kind of had laughed about it because I had had radiation previously, and thought that was the reason. And I talked to my GP. Well, no, I was playing cards with my brother-in-law and sister and Elise one night, and I mentioned, laughing, about Kai, yeah, my hemoglobin was like 10.8, and he went, what? You know, that's pretty low. Have you gotten that checked out again? And I said, no, I didn't think much about it. I didn't know what that number didn't mean anything to me, and he's in the medical field. And so I did check with my general practitioner, and he actually looked back at the records and said, you know, this is not inconsistent with your history since I've seen you, and I'm not too overly concerned about it. And I, at that point, was at least intuitively, I said, well, at least refer me somewhere. And so I've recorded that. I've actually written a very long piece about finding out and what that was like. But I can skip over that part to say that the diagnosis was made, and then of course you're evaluating everything at that point. It's stage 4, and talked to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society president of South Carolina, and he said very frankly, if I were diagnosed with that anywhere in the country, I would come to the physician at the medical university, and gave us the guy's name. And within a week or two, we were in the medical university, and it was an amazing difference from the diagnostic person to him, who Stuart was just extraordinary in so many ways. And so Dr. Stewart recommended a certain clinical trial that was very promising and had a very high likelihood of percentage of people who achieved remission through it. And so that's the route we went. And in the midst of that chemo process, it was actually before the diagnosis that the district superintendent called me, and knowing I was facing some health issues that weren't identified yet, she said, and this was still early in the year, would a move to Spartanburg be a blessing or a burden for your family? And I thought about it overnight, and I told her, in the end, I think it probably would be a blessing, depending on where it is. You know, and of course she couldn't identify that, but so started chemo in April, and in June we were moving, and so it was quite a process. And the decision was made to, because it was a clinical trial, I had to keep the protocols and do it in Charleston. The enormous benefit of that was it was paid for, and so that was a real blessing. And the church to which I went, just like my previous church, the predecessor had been just awful, but actually it was precisely the opposite. I was following one of my best friends in the ministry, and he had prepared the way in extraordinary ways, and the church was equipped in a way that my previous congregation wasn't, for leaders to step up when the pastor was ill. And they did that for a pastor they hadn't met or known, and it was an extraordinary instance of the church being the church, and the beloved community doing exactly what it's called to do and created to do by God. And it was there were just these amazing providences within that context. And we were across town from my family and 3 hours closer to Elise's family, and so all of those things made it an enormous blessing for us to go to St. James. And there was a lot to learn there as well, but there were also just stalwarts in place who had enough stability and faith and kind of grounding to allow a pastor to lean on them in extraordinary ways. And so the parsonage was a better fit. The neighborhood was one we loved, and it was just a good situation for all kinds of reasons. But in the midst of a good situation, we were. I finished therapy, I think, in late September, and within a month's time, had relapsed, and it was not a quiet relapse. I was reviewing records on it the other day that I hadn't actually seen, because they had put my records online from Spartanburg, and there's a marker within the blood work called LDH, and it's not the cholesterol marker, but it's a swelling marker, inflammation, and the norm is 200 to 300, and mine on the date of my relapse was 6,700, and so that has been a marker of my lymphoma throughout